Firstly, can I start by thanking Leeds Community Homes for organising this event and bringing the screening of Push to you. Now, for those of you who don't know, to tell you a bit about Leeds Community Homes, well, they spearhead all sorts of initiatives around finding a people-powered solution, looking to change what they say is Leeds' dysfunctional housing market, which is currently struggling to meet the demands for affordable homes to rent or buy in the UK's third largest city. And they do this by supporting community organisations to create their own new people-powered homes, things like co-housing schemes, cooperatives, community land trusts, self-build schemes and more. And they're also doing it by developing new community-controlled affordable housing themselves. They're actually acting as a developer themselves, and they're bringing people together to develop the movement, which is exactly why they've brought you this film tonight. So if you want to know some more about them, please do have a look at their website, leedscommunityhomes.org.uk. And just quickly to introduce myself, for those of you that I don't know, I'm Peg Alexander, a TV and radio broadcaster, journalist, presenter, and also a little bit of a documentary maker myself. But I should admit that I've got a bit of a double life, because broadcasting is actually my second career. After spending over 20 years working in social and public policy, regeneration and government, and a short spell in national politics myself. But a couple of years ago, I made a documentary about people-powered housing, as a result of which I ended up also working with Leeds Community Homes and now also with the National Community-Led Homes Partnership. So I'm a part of this movement as well myself, so I'm looking forward to this so much. But the main person you want to hear from tonight, of course, is Fredrik Gertten, who's joining us from Sweden tonight. Fredrik is an award-winning Swedish director and journalist. His latest works, Becoming Zlatan, Bikes versus Cars, Big Boys Gone Bananas and Bananas, have met audiences in over 100 countries and have been screened at leading festivals. In 1994, he founded the production company WG Film, which is one of Sweden's most prominent documentary production companies, famous for local stories with a global understanding and impact. He's also previously worked as a foreign correspondent and columnist for TV, radio and press in Africa, Latin America, Asia and around Europe. And in 2017, he was named honorary doctor at Malmö University. Welcome, Fredrik. How wonderful to be on this call with you.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
Well, this is all very weird. I have to say, I'm finding this kind of quite strange, quite weird, but we will work our way through. So there are loads and loads of issues that we're going to touch on. We're going to talk about tonight as we talk about the film itself. So many different issues there. But I want to start with the fact that you are a filmmaker. I mean, as I mentioned there, I've mentioned a number of films that you've made, right away from, you know, a profile of, I don't know if we call him one of Sweden's most successful footballers, or actually whether we call Zlatan Abramovich Sweden's most successful footballer, through to a film about whether we're ruled by cars. I personally think that film and video tells a story in a way that often serious writing sometimes can't. Do you see yourself as a filmmaker or a campaigner or a bit of both? Talk to me about the fact that you've made these issue-based films.
No, I'm a filmmaker. That's my job. But of course, I'm interested in society, and I'm interested in to understand what's cooking out there. And of course, when my film then is done, I love if they can be used, like tonight, with people who are engaged and who want to do something in their society. So if my films can be a tool when you make change, I'm happy and proud. But first of all, I need to make a film that is worth watching. So that's like, I need to be professional in the storytelling part also. Otherwise, it's like, it's not only about doing the right thing. You also have to do it so it works.
Well, I've spoken to a few people today who've watched the film, and everybody said, I mean, I don't want to use the words how much they enjoyed the film, because I don't think most people would say that they enjoyed the film, if you know what I mean. But I think people saying how much they've appreciated the film. In fact, we've got Charles on the chat has said, well done for a really great film. I mean, what what was it about this particular issue that drew you in, that made you say, I'm going to make a film this time about housing, after you've made films, there's the famous film Bananas about the Dole food group, or even ones about, as I was saying, about cars, or recently one about gold?
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit. I mean, I'm interested in cities overall. That's one thing that I try to understand what's happening and why the changes. But I'm also interested in how the most powerful people on the planet, how their actions impact our lives, and they do it by lobby, by buying, they know the tricks, and I think it's important for us and for me as a filmmaker also to understand how they do it. So the Big Boys Gone Bananas you talked about was when
Tell
I
us about that, because I watched that last night, and that
no,
film is about you taking on the big boys and their tricks.
well, I did a film called Bananas where I followed banana workers from Nicaragua that were suing Dole Food Company, which is the biggest fruit company on the planet. They were suing them for the use of a banned pesticide that made the workers sterile. So I made a film about the court case. When I was about to premiere the film, they attacked me with cease and desist letters, and they really scared the shit out of everybody in LA where we're supposed to premiere the film. And in the end, they sued me. But they were also not only suing me with, with all their lawyers, but they were also had a PR company changing the story. So I mean, so they put a lot of efforts into shifting the focus away from the real story. And I think so. When I did this follow-up, the Big Boys Gone Bananas, it was very much about understanding how they did it and how they shifted the focus away from what we should talk about. So there was something in that made me interested also to see, okay, so why do we have this traffic system that was bike versus cars that is so not functional? How did it happen? Why before we had the bikes, pedestrians, everybody was sharing the streets together. Suddenly the car took over everything. It's a very short time in history. How did they do it? So that was like also a very easy question, and I tried to understand that. So now it was like, okay, so why are the prices going up all over the world?
This is the prices of homes.
Homes, yeah. So I started off with a kind of a simple question. Of course, knowing that the most powerful have had a way of changing policies. I mean, I'm shooting in Chile, and Chile was like where they tested out this deregulated model that then your Thatcher and then Reagan in the US copied and made into a global thing, this kind of what some people call neoliberalism. So, and in Push, as you see in the film, in the end we understand that all these deregulations have led to what we have today, which means that governments has less power, cities has less power, tenants has less power, and the rich are bigger than ever and stronger than ever. So it's like it's kind of an extreme situation, and also they've been praising the market to save everything, to solve everything. And walking the streets of London or San Francisco or New York or wherever, you see, well, there's a lot of people sleeping rough. So the market is not solving everything. And a lot of people, not only working class, middle class, even if you go to London, you have young doctors, would be studying for years. They still can't afford to live. So it's an extreme situation that we landed in. And so I wanted to understand that. That's a film you.
I mean, it seems to me that there are sort of like almost three big themes or big issues that kind of come through in the film, and we can sort of take each of those. There is that whole question of cities. Who are cities for these days? Why are they like the way they are? What is the purpose and function of cities? There's the role of kind of globalization, finance there, if you want to talk about sort of neoliberalism, what's happened there. And then, of course, there's that question of, is housing a right? Or should housing be a right? Let's start right there, because I know we've got a lot of people who are from the housing world watching tonight, because I mean, obviously the film, and we may have people watching who haven't watched the film. I'm conscious of that as well, so please bear with me. Leilani Farha, who the film follows, she at this stage is UN rapporteur on housing. She comes out with this great quote in the film where she says, you know, she believes housing is a human right. And she's talking about the fact that then puts you in the context of certain bits of legislation and international law. So let's just talk about that concept.
Correct you a little bit. Can I correct you? She doesn't believe that housing is a human right. She knows, you know, because it's actually, this is like the Human Rights Declaration. So this is something all governments have signed on to. It's international law. So it's a law that is also the ruler should obey, basically. So it's a right, and she's, for her, it's, as she is a lawyer, she thinks right is because some people is talking about right to the city, but there is no such right to the city, but there is a human right to an adequate housing. So that's she. I mean, I think the success of her work is that she's been able to change the discourse in this way. When groups in the countries where the film has been playing more, like in Germany or Sweden or Canada or many other countries, groups are now standing up saying housing is a human right. And remember, we have for 30 or 40 years heard housing market, housing market. You know, it's like it's always a connection with market. So you actually shift something back. This is a human right, and you as a government, you need to do something here because you have signed into this declaration of human rights. So I think it's shifting something really important. And in politics, language is really important. And I think as I told you about how Dole Food Company framed my story in one way, it's very much about, so the most powerful people, they pay a lot of money to shift the language. So and they're really successful because they hire really smart and ex-journalists, ex-politicians to create this. So if we can change the language back, we will have a much better chance. So I think that's what I can see what happens with the film in connection with Leilani's work. People are actually talking about housing as a human right.
And one of the things she does say, though, I mean, this isn't an exact quote, so apologies that I've not got all the exact phrasing here, but she talks about the fact that she doesn't necessarily believe that capitalism per se is the problem here, but she talks about unbridled capitalism, and she says that is part of the problem. And then she goes on to say access to gold is not a human right. But access to housing is, and I guess that's what she's talking there about, the idea that governments or whoever have a role to be clear about what should be allowed to be unbridled in the market and what shouldn't be. I mean, do you kind of agree with her on that one? Was the filming this make you change your mind on that?
A lot of people see that capitalism is a huge problem in itself, and of course they are in many ways right. But I still think it's important to keep the debate on one level, and we have long traditions of people, you know, companies or individuals building houses or building homes and renting them out. But the classical landlord, when he was building a house, it was like planting a forest. It was an investment that should pay off after 30 years or more. You know, it's like it was a long-term project. These guys coming in now, the hedge funds, all these the quick money, they go in with a very short perspective. When Blackstone enters, it's like 4 or 5 years, but then, I mean, more and more of our homes are part of financial products, which means that the individual little shareholder of these products, they can buy and sell every day. So but when a housing company goes to a pension fund or the hedge fund and asks for an investment, they have to tell them, we are going to deliver profits to you. We're going to push the value up in these homes in a very short time. It's going to be really profitable. And then they have to deliver. And then deliver by pushing up the rents for ordinary people. And the worst thing with this new, because it's actually a new model that is happening all around the world, this renoviction model. It's brutal, and it's in every country they find a way to round the local legislation, and it means that the number of affordable homes in every city goes down. Also in a country like Sweden, where the system is basically quite organized and controlled, but still they found a way to weaken also our system. Yeah. And then, in my little town here, Malmö, Sweden, it's the third city of Sweden, more and more of the big owners of homes here are now owned by international money. So it's more and more this kind of really non-personal big clouds of money owning our homes. And this is like a global trend, they're all going into ordinary people's homes.
Yeah, well, we know, for example, that local authorities in the UK will go to inward investment fairs and try and kind of be selling new build and properties as investment. Let me just, before we go, we've got loads of questions that people have asked, so I'm going to go through those. Just want to kind of bring it back to quite a British thing, and that was obviously that Grenfell Tower plays quite a big part in the film. But for me, that was really interesting, because one of the things I think that probably defines a lot of what goes on with property in Britain, and I'm sure it's similar elsewhere, but there's a particularly British obsession with home ownership and the need to own our own homes. And obviously the Right to Buy programme started by Margaret Thatcher. Lots of people will talk about that and about the long-lasting legacy of that in terms of well, not just gentrification, but a lot of those what then were social homes moving out of the scope of ordinary people. But it's interesting because the bloke who lived in Grenfell that you talked to, he talked about the benefit of being able to buy his own home under Right to Buy. So in a way, it is quite a complicated picture of this, isn't it? Because here, people just feel that if they own their own home, they feel like they have a lot more security. And I understand that, because I live in a rented flat and I had to renew my tenancy just a few weeks ago. And there's always a fear when it comes up to tenancy renewal time. Are they going to put the rent up? Are they going to ask me to leave? You know, all those kind of things. And it is, you know, it is kind of a big thing for us here to want to buy our own homes, but that gets very tied up with excitement about house prices going up, because then people go, oh, my house is worth all this money. You go, well, it's only worth that if you actually sell it, and actually then you've got to pay that same amount of money elsewhere to buy a new place. And this, we have this idea that a rise in house prices is a good thing, and automatically assume it's a good thing, and that's quite a cultural thing here.
No, I know it's also here in many places, people want to own their homes. I'm also living in a city-owned building, so I'm also a renter. But when the house prices go up, it normally means that people own less of their home. So in the old days, people maybe they could own 70% of their home, and the rest was mortgages. Now it's down to 20, no, sometimes even lower. So basically the ownership of our cities is now shifted over to financial institutions. So all of us has lost power, even if we think we're sitting on millions, or some people think about that. Mm-hmm. So, and of course I mean, it's also when the house prices go up, some people, they make some kind of career, they make some kind of money out of sitting on those properties. But most of the people, as you said, they still need to live somewhere. So it's a crazy situation, and it's got totally out of hand everywhere. Mm-hmm. And no politician is ready to do anything about the house prices, because then a lot of their voters will lose money. So it's so complicated.
And of course, London, a lot of international cities, has got so much vacant properties. So many of those new developments that have been built in London have just been straight for investment and have been left.
And the story in the film from London, where you see this is like more real estate investment trust building new condos, around.
Yeah.
And that's also a global phenomenon. You will see the same in Bangkok or in Ho Chi Minh City or in Munich or in New York or in Toronto or wherever. It's happening everywhere. And it's basically, again, a financial product, building all this stuff and selling it on a global market. And the people who are buying in are quite often people who don't intend to live there.
Yeah.
And so it's also, and in London, it has this effect that actually the local service goes down, the pubs are closing, everything is closing, because as people don't live there, there is no, the community dies.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go to some of the questions that people have been, we've had a few coming by email beforehand, some while we've been talking. Let's start with talking a bit about Blackstone, the investment company. Now, they feature quite heavily in the film, and if anyone hasn't watched the film, you'll need to go and look them up. Effectively, they tell me if I'm getting this wrong, but they are the largest investment company in the world. Is that right?
The largest hedge fund in the world. Yeah.
World, yeah. And they obviously play quite a big part in the film. I went on their website earlier. This is what it says on the homepage of their website. It says they are uniquely positioned to make a positive impact through our investments and to strengthen the communities in which we live and work. That's what it says on the homepage of their website. Steve Hurry, who's the director of Leeds Community Homes, he says, have you had any pushback or feedback from Blackstone to the film? I mean, obviously in the film, Leilani hopes she's going to meet them, and then that doesn't happen.
Blackstone, when we played in New York, they contacted the Swedish consulate and were not happy. When we played the film in the Swedish parliament, they contacted the parliament. When it was broadcasted on Swedish TV, they contacted the TV. When it was broadcasted in France and Germany, they contacted the broadcaster. So it's been a lot of legal activities, well, mainly PR activities. But I mean, they're of course not happy. It's like a company that we haven't heard the name before. So they're used to fly under the radar. They are known in, if you have some savings somewhere or your pension fund, you can check them up. They're probably in one of the products you're buying into, probably mine too. It's really hard, and they are everywhere. So they're really strong. The president of Blackstone is a very good friend of Donald Trump. He was actually the chairman of Trump's first economic advisory board. They're also neighbors in Mar-a-Lago. So it's a very strong company, and they are so strong, so they have a way of also understanding the movements, the financial movements on the planet. So in 2007, before the 2008 crisis, they sold off a lot of stuff and were just sitting and waiting for the crash to come. This time, the Schwartzman, the CEO of Blackstone, said a few weeks ago that they're sitting on 150 billion of dry powder. 150 billion US dollar dry powder, money ready to go on a shopping tour. So this is their moment. This kind of crisis is vulture time. It's shopping time for the strongest everywhere. So this is it's dangerous for societies right now. I mean, as you see in the film, the 2008 crisis made them much stronger and us much weaker. Our incomes hasn't gone up at all. There has like tenfolded. So, and now when governments again are emitting new money that we have to pay with our taxes one day, so the mountain or the river or the ocean of money will be even bigger. And that's where they love to be. the problem for people with a lot of money right now is they have not so many places to place them. It's harder to make profits. That's why they are now entering into our homes. And they are buying everything they can find. If they're really out looking for things they can buy. And they are doing whatever they can do to get there. That's why they also spend a lot of money on lobby and to change the mind of the politics and so on.
So we had questions about the role of government. Somebody saying, what is the role of government in this process? And obviously the end of the film ends with make the shift happening and some politicians coming together. I mean, this may be a question that you feel like you can't answer, Fredrik, really. Leilani, but that one of those questions is, have governments sleepwalked into this, or actually has this, how much do politicians realize some of this is going on? How much do they want it to be happening? What can we do?
When I started to do this film, I didn't know all this, so I know that most journalists don't know, most citizens don't know, and most politicians don't have a clue. So we are all none of us have really seen it. The people who have experienced this the most are the people living in affordable homes that have been bought by these vultures. So they are the ones they knew before us. So this is but what Leilani then forms in the film, as you saw, the shift. And now she left the UN and she's now the global director of the shift, and now they're not building up an organization. So it is a structure of, let's say, cities can join in and share experiences. And there is a huge production of experiences right now. So because cities has for a long time, they are closer to the citizens than the government in some way. So they really feel the stress. And the stress is enormous in many cities. So that's why a lot of big cities are also a member of the shift. I tell you, today, the Danish parliament took a new legislation. And I was just checking a speech from the housing minister in Denmark, and he calls it Lex Blackstone. So and he says, well, Blackstone are welcome to Denmark, but then they have to behave like anybody else. So the legislation says that they can't pull any profits out within, in a certain time, and they can't raise the rent in 5 years. So they're doing a lot to make it less interesting. They actually don't want that money. Berlin has taken the same kind of legislation, also a 5-year rent cap. So Berlin, actually this year, after this legislation came in, Berlin, the rents went down 5%. It's been going up a lot. So so from city to city, there are a lot of incentives. There's of course a lot of, they're trying to take on Airbnb, which are really...
Yeah, the Airbnb thing's kind of quite an interesting one, isn't it? Because when they first came in the market, well, I say in the market, they go to the language of that, but when they first appeared, everybody thought they were going to be a great disruptor that was going to sort of take that out of the hands of the big property chains and the big hotels. And then, of course, you've got cities like Paris and Barcelona saying that it's just been an absolute disaster.
They're snatching like 20 to 25% of the homes of those cities. And so it's in Barcelona between 2015 and 2019, the rents went up 50% in 4 years. And this is repeating all over the world. Some countries like Portugal, Cyprus, Malta, and others had some kind of golden visas where they actually, after the financial crisis, they invited investors to come and they could get a passport, an EU passport. In Portugal, in Lisbon, Porto, it totally destroyed the cities. It's almost like death-kissed cities. So then you get Russian, Chinese, Brazilian, Angolan, whatever. I mean, money has no color, has no skin color. It's just money. We don't really know where it comes from. But anyway, a lot of people have been buying into those cities, and they're just placing their money, and then they don't do so much.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly like these empty homes in London,
Mm-hmm.
because it's also criminal money. It's also money laundering, and that's why they want to buy into to place their money in the UK, for example, because even if you overpay a house in London, then you can go to the bank and say, I own this house, and then you can go and get some fresh money. So a lot of homes in your country are empty. In London, there is not a housing crisis because there are a lot of houses empty. So it's actually only a crisis of affordable homes.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's look at some of the other questions that we got that people have sent in. I'm going to try and group some of these. Somebody said, what alternatives to this model of housing or models of affordable housing did you or Leilani come across while you were making the film?
It's really relevant to talk about alternatives, but the focus of this work was to try to understand the monster, to understand what we're up against. And I think that's really important because, as I said before, journalists don't know, politicians don't know. We need to see the structure of what we are facing, what is creating all these problems. And then we should talk about alternatives. But I think that's something you have to do out there. And I guess the cooperative movement is one of these alternatives. But that hasn't been my focus. And remember, I'm a filmmaker. Yeah. I'm not a housing expert.
So Eliza says she was speaking with an ethical lender in the UK this morning. He mentioned that he thinks there will be a movement out of cities by people who are able to work from home. So she was saying, do you see any hope in the idea that COVID-19 increased home working will relieve some of the pressure on home prices in cities, or does the financialization of housing trump all of this?
Yeah, I mean, we can hope that, but I mean, I'm sure there are some kind of middle-class professions that are probably you can do from home and so on, but a lot of people can't. I mean, we should remember that the people who can't afford to live in the cities are the people who actually need to work in the cities. So, I mean, the bus driver, the nurse, the police, I mean, the shopkeeper, everybody who's working, they're the ones who, I mean, the people who are running the cities can't afford to live in the cities. That will never be solved by distance. And so, I mean, if you don't think that the people with most money will move out, I'm not so sure. I think people would like to stay in cities. And there is no sign of that the housing market is going down. You know, some people think that maybe the office structures will be less profitable, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. But I mean, but if we talk about homes, it's still a place where money is going.
Mm-hmm. So some more questions that we've got coming in. Sorry, I've got questions in 3 different places. If I'm peering at my screen, we're all learning how to do these things, aren't we? Let me look at some of the other questions that have come in. Someone says, what do you think there's anything we can do as individuals to stop the financialisation of housing? Someone says she's changed a regular pension fund to an ethical fund. Sorry, I say her. I don't know that it's a her. So this person's changed their regular pension fund to an ethical fund. Support local business in their neighbourhood and only bank with ethical banks, but is that enough?
No, it's not enough, but we have to do many things. And I think understanding the monster is one. That could also be mapping your own city. If you're in Leeds, for example, who is owning Leeds now? Who are the new actors? Who owns them? So I think only by mapping your city, you will also understand what you're up against. And of course, pension funds in one way have some kind of, you can access them. So there's been I think it was like a Church of England who started to take out their money from the arms industry a long time ago. And now there's been a lot of movements who want to divest from oil and coal.
Absolutely. I mean, the divestment movement is massive.
Yeah, very strong movement. So of course you could divest companies like Blackstone.
Arguably, there'll be.
I've been writing to my pension funds that I don't want to have any Blackstone. So of course, this is also happening. So, and that's why we also need this film. You know, we need this kind of clarity. Who are the bad guys? And because they want to fly under the radar. That's why they don't like us to talk about this. So talk about it. You know, keep talking and map your city and talk to your pension funds and talk to your banks. I don't want to have my money in a company that is kicking people out to the streets.
I mean, that might be another thing for people, you know, to think about, because obviously, as a lot of companies and pension funds do start to divest from fossil fuels and around climate change, they'll be looking at other places to invest. So definitely worth keeping an eye on that. Looking at some more questions. Someone told us, it's interesting, that follows on from what you were saying about mapping your city, because one of the messages I think that I'm picking up as we go through is about us thinking about our own cities and where we are and trying to talk about that. But someone says, how do we form coalitions which have adequate power to combat the opportunism which is provided by simply having an awful lot of money? So how do we kind of get the people who've got the money in the room to talk to people who are working on affordable housing?
I think in one way that the very specific things with this kind of new landlords, the global landlord, the faceless landlord, is that they don't care about anything than profits. The classical landlord is actually, I mean, if it's even the richest landlord in Leeds is probably a fan of a football club in Leeds. You know, it's part of this community in some way. So I think that you could actually unify more than you can think. So even local rich people could be a part of a coalition against this kind of faceless investors. So I think that you can actually do more than you believe, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a right wing or left wing call. You know, it can actually be Leeds against vulture funds. So I mean, I think you can formulate it in a much clearer way. And then, and I, to be honest, when I've been out showing the film, a lot of people in the real estate industry has come up to me and saying, "Good, we like this. We don't like them. You know, they are too aggressive. You know, their perspective is so short. They are destroying our cities." And then if you move it one step further to people, you know, in commercial spaces, the shops, the pubs, the other part of what we like with the cities, a lot of the small shop owners are so stressed, so they have to give up. And who moves in? It's chains. And the chains are the same. It's also part of a financialized system. Also owned by structures that don't care anything about your city. So it's like, so we can also join forces with the shop owners and the bar owners, and you know, so then because they are also under a lot of stress, because when they want to deliver more return on capital to their investors, they need to push up the rents also for the pubs and for the shops.
Well, what do you say though to people who would say to you, well, this is all very well, but you know, we have regenerated cities, you know, here in the UK, around the world. I mean, Leeds is a prime example. I mean, it's a completely different city to what it was like 20 years ago. So, but because of this finance, we have been able to build all these new developments. We have been able to regenerate. We have been able to bring these companies in, you know, seeing people flocking to the shops as they've reopened after lockdown. What do you say to people who say, come on, if we haven't had this kind of this financial situation, that regeneration and development would have happened?
I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not an enemy of gentrification. I love the hipsters coming in, making good coffee. I love young people who start a funky restaurant. I don't think that's the problem. And of course you need to fix a house when it goes down. But the way they are fixing houses is only so they can push up the rents. Mm-hmm. And it's a very short-term perspective. Also, when you see these, the real estate investment trust, the condos shooting up, it's very poor quality. It's not sustainable. They will not last for long. So it's like it's very speculative stuff that is shooting up. It's not building a city as we built cities before. So I think, and if you ask somebody who is like a local landlord and ask him, is his business good or is it bad? It's probably quite a decent business. But if you're a hedge fund and you're going to deliver profits to investors day by day, it's a big thing. You know, they want so much more return on capital. Mm-hmm. They need to be more aggressive, and we don't need them. We don't need them.
There's a couple of questions that have come in on a similar topic, so I'll read one of them out from Neil, which somebody else as well beforehand sent another kind of similar-ish question. But Neil says one of the big messages in the film is that we should appeal to states to implement the right to adequate housing. He says, is this necessarily the right approach, given that states are so deeply implicated in the commodification and crisis of housing? And someone else did send a message beforehand saying, of course, a lot of governments are relying on the value of land going up for them to sell, and they are actually part of that system and relying on that as well.
It is like it was two aspects of that question, but anyway, as Saskia Sassen says in the film, governments are much poorer now than they were before. So why are governments much poorer now than they were before? That's because the private sector, the funds, have been able to print more money than them. So before the state was stronger because they were like much more in control. Now the hedge funds, they're making so much money every day. So that has weakened the state. So one of the tools they have as a city, when you want to build something, you need to sell something because the tax money is not enough. It was before. Something has shifted. And so in that game, cities try to be smart. But it's not so easy. They are much weaker. The toolbox of a city in anywhere in the world is it's emptier now than ever before. So and of course, national governments are quite often in the hands of the lobby. The lobby are spending a lot of money to move governments their way. And of course, in the UK, they are quite successful. In the US, they're really successful. Like in Denmark now with a social democratic government, they're less successful. And in Berlin and in other cities. So this is of course a political game, but I think any smart politician would feel the stress of the people. And you can see, I just had a Black Lives Matter manifestation out my window here in Malmö, Sweden. But I mean, if you see what happens in the US now, it's not only about police violence, it's actually also about the stress people feel every day about, can I pay my rent or not?
Yeah.
This is like one of the biggest issues on the planet right now. Can I pay my rent? Can I stay in my home?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly know a friend of mine who's in Berlin telling me about some of the stuff that's happened just in the short time she's been there, where people power has really, really made a difference on things. I mean, and she was living in Istanbul actually when everything got really, really nasty. In Taksim Square as well. So actually, I was in Taksim Square. The last cafe to close in Taksim Square, I was actually in there having a coffee as they were closing it down. And I think we were the last people to be served in there. And of course, that was all part then again of building big stuff, shopping centres.
I was actually in Istanbul showing the film in February. So they are, I mean, also in Turkey, of course, they're facing the same problems. I mean, I've been showing the films in so many countries, and I haven't been to any place where people don't say they can start to talk about their own city after seeing the film. I mean, Kuala Lumpur, or I've been to so many places with the film.
Yeah,
and it becomes relevant everywhere. And I think that's sometimes that's the quality of film you asked about. It's like it's you can have a local debate, but if you can, the film can give you a global pattern that you can then put down. Sometimes when you talk about housing politics at home, it becomes really complicated, really boring, very technical. So I think that the ambition here is to make something so we actually can talk about the factors that are operating in our cities.
Yeah. So before we kind of come, because we are getting up towards the end, just before we get on to just some other questions that were about making the film, which would be nice to sort of end in, just give us a bit of an update about what's happened since the film, because obviously it was released in 2019. So what's happened since? Obviously Leilani's moved to Make the Shift initiative. She's got all those cities signed up there, and you were saying to me there has been shift and movement.
Yeah, I mean, you just mentioned Germany. Berlin has made a hell of a difference. They really moved stuff. New legislation. Portugal has taken, for example, a new human rights-based housing legislation with Leilani's support. Also Canada. Also other countries are working on that. Mexico, I think France, Spain. So it's a lot of governments are trying to do something. As I also mentioned before, Airbnb is now being challenged in many more cities. Right now, under the COVID crisis, in a lot of cities, Airbnb apartments are going back to ordinary people, ordinary contractors. So in Prague, for example, or I was in a talk with the city of Amsterdam last week, and they have also now taken a new legislation that will weaken Airbnb. So a lot of cities are now trying to.
Well, it's interesting because Prague's trying to, from stuff I was reading, in Prague, they're really questioning whether they want the tourists back as well, actually, aren't they? Because people saying they're fed up of basically a lot of British drunk and the tourists turning up for 2 or 3 days.
It's also that, I mean, I was out with some activists in Prague after showing the film, and they showed me at the big Václav place, the big square. There was like 2 buildings with ordinary people left. All the other apartments were emptied. So it's in very few years this has happened. So it's over the last 5 years, cities has totally changed their face. So it means people have to go, and if you happen to have an apartment there, but your local shop is suddenly kicked out, and then somebody's selling souvenirs or expensive water. So people can't even, I can't stay here anymore. That's something we hear a lot. So it is an extreme situation. Of course, it has to turn around.
Yeah, maybe COVID-19 does bring some of those opportunities.
It at least gives governments and city governments a chance to act. And I think a lot of things are doing that.
Yeah. So before we sort of finish off, just looking at some other questions that we had, just going back to talking about making the film a bit. Steve asked if there are particular challenges in making a film about housing compared to some of the other subjects that you've covered. And they wanted to know how long it took as well.
It took 2 years to make the film. And the big challenge is to understand what's going on and to bring into the film sentences that make sense also for myself, because it's also a learning journey for myself. So that was the hardest thing, But then you have the Nobel Prize winner, Joseph Stiglitz, the famous economist, saying, you can make a lot of money by destroying the planet, but there's something wrong with that. There's something wrong with kicking out people into the streets. So sometimes I love that sentence because it brings us back to what we are telling our own kids. Behave well, be kind, be nice to the plants, to the animals. This kind of the moral we teach our kids, that's the moral we would like to have the rulers to have in our world. But suddenly we have these guys that are destroying our planet and also making our homes into a commodity.
That was one of the sentences that I wrote down as well, actually, from it, because I loved it. Because, as you say, there is this unbelievably clever, knowledgeable economist who put it so almost like there's a phrase we'd say here, no shit Sherlock. Do you know what I mean? Like, state in the big novice or what,
I
and it
believe in
was a
language,
really great statement. Sometimes we forget the simple statements, don't we?
and I think we could also we can use simple language. We don't have to land in a lot of very complicated technical policies around everything. Of course, you also politics are also technical. I know that, but I mean, it's still when we talk about things, we can go down to and remember what the values should be, and that's not about left wing or right wing or Marxism or whatever ism. It's not about that. It's like common sense, for God's sake.
So Rita asks if she wanted to get more people to see the film, how can she access it after today?
I love that question, Rita.
I thought you might.
No, I mean, it's actually very frustrating because the film had a premiere in the UK in early March, and we got great reviews in the Times and the Guardian and many other places. We did a lot of press, and the film was booked to be on theaters all around the UK and Ireland, and we had a lot of panels planned, and then the virus hit the world. Mm. So we are waiting to see if we can roll that plan again, but we don't know. Nobody knows anything, and unfortunately we can't risk putting the film out online in the UK. It's out in many other countries already been on TV and so on. So the UK is a little bit late in the story here, but hopefully we will get started soon. So please go to Push the Film website and sign into the newsletter, and then or follow us on social media, Push the Film, or my name, Fredrik Gertten, on Twitter or Facebook, and then you will get updated when the film comes out in the UK, because we have a distributor ready to go. And then we will need all of you to talk about the film, because then the film can, I mean, hopefully the film can be used as a tool for your work also in the UK.
So I think we are just kind of coming up to the hour point now. I mean, tell me if I'm right, that what I think your message is in terms of, because there was lots of questions about what can we do, what are the solutions. It does seem to me that quite a strong message you've given us was to look at our own cities. You know, obviously we've got quite a few people in Leeds watching here, but also people from elsewhere. Look at our own cities. You talked about mapping our own cities. Look at what's going on. We can talk to our own councils. Are you going to, how much going off to other countries are you doing and trying to flog property and bringing investors in? What are you doing? There's a role for us to talk not just of our cities, but also with national governments. And also, I guess, for people may want to see if their cities sign up to make the shift as well.
I can say one thing, but because this initiative we are now experiencing here, that you've seen the film at home, and then we have this call. So anybody who works for an NGO or works in a city or an architect firm or a political party, you can do the same. So, I mean, last week, then I had these 3 departments of the city of Amsterdam. A lot of civil servants are watching the film. And then I had a talk. But I had so many mayors seeing the film, so many politicians, also in parliaments and so on. So use the film as a tool, and then contact us, and we will help you to make it possible. It's a very good way of, when civil servants watch the film together and talk about the city from a new perspective, it actually, stuff happens. And so to believe, I mean, I believe in talking about things and understanding things. So please do that.
And certainly, I think, obviously Barcelona features quite a lot in theirs there. But I mean, Amsterdam's going to be a really interesting one to watch, I think, because they're talking about their post-COVID-19 plan, trying to base it a bit around the donut economics theory as well. So there's all sorts of interesting conversations going on there. But we have got to the end of our hour, so I am going to finish us off. Fredrik, it's been, well, I mean, it's kind of interesting because, you know, you're in Malmo, I'm in Leeds, and it feels like we're just kind of sitting at the table with each other. We've had quite a few people joining us. Thank you to everyone at home who's been watching, sending the questions in, taking part in the chats. I'm sure we've had people watching on social media as well. As you were saying, push the film. That's where people can go, sign up to the newsletter, follow you on social media. A plea for Leeds Community Homes. Please could everybody make sure they're following Leeds Community Homes as well on social media. I think just to end now, for me to say an enormous thank you very much. Thank you for bringing the film to Leeds. We wish you were here in person. I don't know whether you were supposed to be at DocFest at Sheffield at the moment, or
I was the film was at DocFest last year.
Oh, right, last year, yeah. And thank you so much for doing that. And I'm sure this is the start of a conversation. So as strange as this may be, we haven't got any theme tune to go out to. I think I just say thank you to you. Everybody, can you all clap at home, please, to say thank you and keep up the amazing work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.